Welcome to today's webinar, compiled and produced by the team at biznews.com. All of our webinars are interactive. We encourage you to pose questions to our guests. The more challenging, the better. And the earlier you get the questions in, the better the chance of having them answered. The recording of this webinar will be available later today on the biznews.com channel on YouTube. Hi there, I'm Alec Hogg, and it's a real pleasure to be with you today with our very, very special webinar that we have. Both Robert Paddock and Sarah Elphick are here. I'm going to ask them to switch on their cameras now so you can see them in person. But while they're busy doing that, Stuart Lohman, our general manager, is behind the controls. Stu, do you want to give us some of the technical issues so make sure that everyone can actually hear us and that they know how to participate?
Excellent, thanks, Alec, and welcome, Robin and Sarah. Just quickly, before we go into it, there's a little high five button on your control panel on the right-hand side. If you can see three pretty faces and hear my voice, can you please give us a high five just so that we know it's coming through loud and clear? Oh, there we go, Alec, got some nice high fives coming through there. And then those new to webinars, we'd like to keep them very conversational. There's little questions dropped on that same control panel. If you put your questions in there as we run through the discussion, Alec can pass them on to Robert or Sarah. But all good this side, Alec?
Perfect. And as we said right in the introduction, this is a webinar that is designed to be interactive, and no more so than today, given who our guests are. I'll just give you a little bit of background on this, and perhaps then it'll frame the conversation. Earlier today, I had a fascinating interview with Magda Wezicka and Magnus Haystick. There's huge news that came out in the mini budget, but it was hidden in the fine print. Essentially what is happening is that in future, South Africans will be able to invest 100% of their retirement funds in the international market. In other words, you can make yourself completely oblivious to what happens to South African investment markets with your retirement funds by working through exchange traded funds, etc. It's a massive, massive change, and one that hasn't quite been picked up yet by the media. We'll be running that interview later this afternoon. And what the relevance of that is that the powers that be in Pretoria are kind of getting the message that if you make it a hostile environment for people in South Africa to make their futures here, you will lose your tax base. And we know how many South Africans have been emigrating. The reason that the change, and this dramatic change, up to now, by the way, you were only allowed to put 25% of your assets, your retirement assets, into the international community. You had to keep 75% here, and it's been horribly underperformed. And that has been a major reason why so many people have financially emigrated. But let's park that on one side, because today we're going to talk about something that is an equal deterrent to financially emigrate or to leave South Africa for reasons which are often quoted to me. When I spent 3 years in London establishing BizNews there, it was that we wanted to give our children the best possible education. And Valenture Institute ensures that that's no longer an issue. And I think we're going to unpack that in the next little while when we talk with Rob and Sarah about exactly what Valenture is. But Rob, you've got a really interesting story. Get Smarter, as a company that you and your brother founded and then duly sold on to NASDAQ listed to you. How did the idea for Get Smarter come into being, and what exactly motivated you to sell it and then start Valenture Institute, which is almost like, for you, I suppose, stage 2 of your career?
Alec, thank you. And I guess in terms of the catalyzing force of Get Smarter, One of the reflections that my brother Sam and I had in the very early stages of Get Smarter was that the world of working professionals and the world of work is changing so rapidly that if we think we can just rest on our laurels and rely on our university degree or our schooling to carry us through for the full duration of our professional lives, the world is just changing too quickly. We need to move into this new modality of constantly learning, unlearning, and relearning throughout our lives. So off the back of that, one of the other things we recognize is that top institutions and the brand value that those institutions carry have a very meaningful role to play in people's employment prospects of getting raises, prospects of getting into new positions and new companies. And so off the back of, I guess, putting all of that together, we realized there was this great opportunity to make online education available from the world's leading universities in industry relevant areas and areas of dramatic growth. We had the great privilege of growing Get Smarter over a decade plus, eventually working with the likes of Harvard, Stanford, Cambridge, Oxford, and many of the other top universities around the world. And really this was as a result of the incredible graduation rates and the incredible levels of engagement that we were able to achieve amongst our students at Get Smarter. And we really put this down to what we came to refer to as a high touch and socially rich approach to online education. Now, what the association with online education is this experience, which is either kind of largely asynchronous, students are working through a kind of computer mediated experience almost entirely on their own, or it's just a kind of what's now been called Zoom bees and Zoom bombs, where students are just kind of replicating what's in the physical classroom, but online. And what we managed to find, I guess, a magic formula around is how to create rich and engaging learning experiences and environments where students are intimately supported by teachers such as Sarah, where they have the intimate support of mentors, where there's a rich and engaging environment where they're collaborating with their peers on projects, where they've got a range of extracurriculars that they can partake in. And really off the back of the Get Smarter experience, which incidentally we've now educated over 200,000 students from 154 countries around the world, we've really stress tested the system to the nth degree. And after selling Get Smarter, my immediate thought went to, well, surely there's application for what we've learned in the space in over a decade in the high school domain. And that was really the catalyzing force behind starting the Valenture Institute. And to speak to the brand value piece and to speak to your introduction, one of the things that we've recognized very clearly is that we need to be setting our students up regardless of where they are located, whether they are in rural Mpumalanga or whether they are in Australia, with an opportunity to get an accreditation standard that is recognized by global by the world's leading universities. And so we worked very hard to get our accreditation with Pearson EdXL, which is a global accreditation standard, and offering an international version of a British curriculum. You know, a stat that for me is rather eye-watering, Alec, is that the achievement of a national senior certificate in South Africa statistically gives you no better chance of getting a job than not having a national senior certificate at all. And that for me is something that we should really stand up and take notice of. The fact that the world of employment is now saying we don't respect this qualification to the degree that it used to be. And so I think that we need to be thinking very, very differently about how to set our young generation up for success.
Sarah, how did you get involved?
So I was looking for a new job. I had decided I was done with the school that I was working at, and I had a choice between two job offers. One was to go to an established high school that had a great reputation and, you know, all these traditions, or to take a risk on this online school. And I decided to take the risk. I'm a big believer in that growth comes from taking risks, and it was well worth it. So I started as a senior English teacher and have moved into my current role as faculty lead. So what I do is I manage and lead and mentor a cluster of teachers within our faculty team. And my main focus now is on people development, teaching quality, innovation, and finding scalable solutions as we seek to serve thousands of students across the globe, and really to take what we are doing in our online school to students everywhere. So our pedagogical approach, sorry? No, go
How's
for
it different? How's your life different to perhaps a teacher who has started Zooming their class? Many schools in South Africa, many people listening to this are saying, okay, during lockdown, my son or my daughter were still doing their schooling. They were still engaging with their teachers. How is it different at the Valenture Institute to, say, a normal private high school?
So what we have done, which is very different and takes a lot of planning, is that in a brick and mortar or a traditional school, you have so much more interaction with your students than you would in an online space. So that means that you have to be a lot more intentional about the way that you spend time with your students and plan very carefully what they're going to do with their time when they're not with you. So we follow the flipped classroom approach, which means that the learners are exposed to the content before they get to us, meaning that when they reach us in the classroom, we can have rigorous conversations about the content as opposed to sort of delivering it. So, you know, World War II ended on this date. They kind of can learn that information on their own. They don't need us. And so what, from, you know, snippets that I've heard from other teachers in other schools, their approach has been to kind of give a pack. Here's the stuff, go learn it, and there's not much facilitation, where we've carefully structured it so that students get snippets of the content before they get to us, instead of this information overload, and it's quite overwhelming for them. So where we're different is that we've designed it specifically to be a flipped classroom, and as well as to have an incredibly engaging experience in the online classroom. So it's not really a replication of what would happen in a brick and mortar.
I think it might be an idea, Rob, with your, and perhaps you agree with us, to actually play a little video, and then it'll just give those who on this webinar a better understanding of how it is different, because I'd really like to explore that with you. Let's see if my tech, if my tech is going to. I'm doing something wrong.
And Alec, I'm very happy to speak through it if it's at all, if you're not able to get to play from your side.
Hi, Rob. I'm not sure where we've lost Alec. I'm just trying to check. Not used to this silence. I'm just sensing to have a look. I hope the video didn't break the internet, as they say.
That would be a lovely point of validation.
Sure. Just give me a sec.
Okay, I'll tell you what happened there. I triple clicked, so the video was a little bit of a crazy thing. Let's go back and let's give it another go, shall we? Let's try now.
Alec, we can't get any. We're not getting any sound. I'm not sure if it's working on your side, but we're just seeing pictures.
Okay. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for letting me know. That means that the tech is not working, so I do apologize. Okay, so we gave it a go. Oh, you know, best laid plans of mice and men. But anyway, apologies. I see no one's left. So.
No, but Alec, I think this is such a wonderful illustration of one of the points and one of the challenges in online education, is that when you're not purpose built for online education, there's a lot of teething issues that come out, and this, I think, is something that schools across the country and indeed across the world have been experiencing. That there are so many of these sorts of teething issues that if you haven't purposefully set up yourself in order to deliver a modality of education specifically for this online environment, specifically considering the context in which these learners find themselves, and then purposefully providing the right layers of support in order to make sure those learners can keep their learning on track, issues emerge. And I think this, at least for me, is one of the reasons why a purpose-built online high school is such a valuable proposition to students. The idea that if you've got an issue like we've just been experiencing, you've got a technical support officer who's immediately on hand. We're not expecting our teachers to be tech support officers. That's not their role. Similarly, when it comes to the sort of feedback loops that Sarah was speaking about, the idea that in fact in the physical classrooms, a lot of what we pick up from our students is very intuitive. You know, you get a sense that Johnny in the back is somewhat disengaged. You get a sense from your corridor conversation with the student that actually I'm going to need to follow up and check in the home circumstances might be quite challenging. We've got these very intuitive kind of data points that we pick up on, and yet in the online environment, that's a lot harder if you haven't built the specific systems in order to give you that feedback. So as an example, with the Valenture Institute, we actually have comprehensive learning analytics across the board that are giving us feedback on students' levels of engagement quite literally on an hour-by-hour basis. We can see the degree to which students have engaged in discussion forums. We can see whether they've been logging on. We can note in our centralized system the feedback from the teachers, from the mentors, from the technical support officers to get this cohesive kind of single view of a student. And it's that level of specificity that actually allows you to really excel in the online environment.
Well, we did have a good lesson there, and Ariella came in to try and help me, but well, I guess it's going to be a little bit more than just what Ariella and I can sort out in a few minutes. But the point is very well made, that it's also something that you've had a lot of experience with. When did you start getting in? How Get Smarter, when did that begin? Just to try and let us understand how much of a digital native you are.
So we started Get Smarter in 2006. It actually was built off the back of a business that my brother and I joined with my mom and dad in 2006. So we've been in online education now for just over 14 years. And again, I think the real privilege of the space is the degree to which we've been able to scale the quality education, and in the Get Smarter context, having achieved 92% graduation rates across the board, and that's for open enrollment programs. So the methodology that we've developed over the years really works, and I think that it's with great excitement that we apply the same principles, the same level of rigor into the online high school context.
We've got a question here from Helene, who says this approach is clearly possible with content subjects like history, but what about subjects like science, accountancy, and maths? Sarah?
It's still absolutely possible, especially I think in terms of the way that we see education. There's a fundamental difference between schooling and educating. Schooling is sage on the stage. You know, if you were to Google images of teachers, you'd have a picture of a teacher standing in front of a chalkboard, pointing, talking, students sitting in rows, facing. There are these passive, empty receptacles that don't bring anything into the space. Whereas educating is saying, here's the information, what do you think about it? How does your lived experience help you to interpret what we're looking at here? How does it apply to your context where you live? And so what we're doing is absolutely possible for subjects beyond content, you know, maths, science, accounting, business, all those subjects, because what we're doing is we're focusing on critical thinking skills and critical engagement with these concepts, as opposed to just saying, here's the information, learn it, regurgitate it, well done, gold star, you move on to the next grade. That's not our focus at all. So you can also sort of imagine it if it was a brick and mortar, if it's easier to imagine, instead of having the sage on the stage delivering the content to the students, you could imagine that the students are all facing each other and they're bouncing ideas off each other, and the teacher's actually on the side sort of prodding, what do you think about this? Here's another question, have you thought of it from this perspective? So we're kind of taking education to another level and really pushing the fact that learning is innate. So, you know, that's so human. People want to learn. So that's what we're emphasizing, as opposed to sort of grades and yes, our grades are looking great, but that's not the emphasis. The emphasis is on creating young people who are critical thinkers that can go into the world and bring real value.
And just to remind you that on your little control panel is a question mark. If you click on the question mark, you can ask your questions. You just type them in. I don't give your surname, so it's pretty anonymous, but by giving your first name, you know who you are, who's actually asking the questions. Mike asks now, he says, how do you do practical experiments?
Should I take that
Right.
one?
Oh, Sarah, yep, your field.
Go for it, Sarah.
So at the moment, our practical experiments, whenever our learners enroll with us, we actually send these amazing welcome packs that have everything they need, from Valenture hoodies to information packs to science kits. So currently what we do is we actually send that through to the learners. And obviously we've set it up so that you are able to use sort of the kinds of things that you have in your kitchen. I know that the students the other day had an experiment where they were able to replicate something with a balloon. There was another way where they just needed bacon. So you're really being able to bring science into the home in a safe way. And ultimately what we would love to do is be able to have virtual science practicals, which there's a lot of software and proven research that shows that is still as effective as having a physical experiment.
Rob?
Yeah, I think Sarah said it very well. I think that particularly the world of virtual reality and so on, and the simulated experiments is something that's coming on in leaps and bounds. Right now, like Sarah said, we are actually doing physical experiments. They get a physical pack in order to complete their practical work. But I think this is such a fast-moving space, and I guess one general comment I would make is that since the advent of COVID, everything in this domain has been put on steroids. So the degree to which there's development in things like virtual simulations and so on, I think you can expect to see some huge leaps over the next 6-12 months.
And the hoodies?
Hoodies are great. We've got hoodies, caps, we've got AirPods, we've got we've got a whole range of branded collateral. And I think maybe this speaks to a point that we're very strong on, which is community and identity. And I think that unfortunately with a lot of online schools, particularly in the States and so on, it's very much seen as kind of like a top up. You take some additional courses if your existing school doesn't offer it. From the outset, one of the objectives we had for the Valenture Institute was to create a thriving community of learners, teachers, mentors, and so on. And so as an example, we start off every Monday morning with an assembly. This past Monday, actually 3 of our students led the assembly, which was super fun. But students will then do one-on-one daily stand-ups with their mentors. They'll then go into a series of, like Sarah said, certain asynchronous content, i.e. content that they're working through on the platform that would include video lectures, notes, interactive simulations, animations, and so much more of this rich and engaging content, all in preparation for a live class where, again, to Sarah's point, the opportunity is to apply what they've learned with the facilitation of a learner in a small group in a live Zoom-like environment. And really the day kind of oscillates between those two: asynchronous activities, live class, asynchronous activities, live class. Towards the end of the day, we've got a range of extracurricular activities for the learners, as well as opportunities for them to have one-on-one sessions, office hours with their teachers. And really what we're doing here is we're creating a real sense of community. We have a school mascot, we have school values that we adhere to, that we speak about regularly, and so on. So this really is the full breadth and depth of a school experience in the virtual environment.
Unri, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, says, could we add technical courses like electricity, mechanics, etc.? We have kits they can use at home to do most practicals, question marks.
So we've got on the kind of computer tech side, we've got some really exciting announcements that will be coming up in the next few weeks. I can't say which universities, but we're in advanced stages of negotiations with actually offering a range of university certificate programs into and making those available to our high school students. But that would include more programs like coding and introduction to artificial intelligence and so on. The very, very practical kind of, I guess, what could be called vocational programs is something we're still looking at. So is it possible? Yes, it's currently not imminently on our roadmap, though.
Marissa asks a very good question, one that occurred to me as well, is how do students make meaningful connections in the classroom, Sarah?
this is something I'm so passionate about. Because as I said at the beginning, I had this decision, take a risk on an online school where you don't really know what that looks like, or go to a traditional school that's established and you kind of know what to expect. And my biggest fear was, what if I can't connect with the students? Because probably the most fundamental aspect of the master teacher is being able to build connections and being relationally driven. It is so critical in any subject to show kids that you care about them, you're interested in them, you're invested in them, and for them to also foster friendships between themselves. So that was my biggest fear, and I've been proven so wrong. It was a complete waste of time being worried about that, because the connections that we're seeing in the online space are so meaningful and so significant. We have some learners who have connected with others in their areas, and they've actually physically met each other and have built friendships beyond the virtual space. But then in the virtual lessons themselves, it's no different to a brick and mortar where you have sort of the louder kids and they come and they bring their personalities into the classroom, and there's room for that. And especially at Valenture, because we don't tailor it to a specific kind of student or a specific kind of person, and because our approach and our attitude towards learning is that the learners need to bring their identities into the space in order for them to really meaningfully engage with their learning and take responsibility for it. So it means that you have a very socially rich environment. And the other thing that makes me really excited about using technology in teaching is that every teacher has a learner who does not want to take a risk in front of their peers, in front of the teacher. So they might be listening, they might be engaged, they might have questions, but they're not going to ask them because they're too shy or whatever the reason might be. So what we have in this online learning space is a shy learner can send me a message privately in the chat during the lesson with a question or an answer, and I can bring that answer into the space. And I don't have to mention their name, but I can say, oh, I've just got a great question in the chat. I'm so glad that this was raised, and I can mention it. And slowly what happens is these learners who would traditionally be very shy and don't really feel that there's a platform or a space for them to share their ideas and thoughts and questions, they suddenly have validation in a way that doesn't really, they're not having to take any serious risks. And you see that their confidence builds in such a meaningful way that the quiet students are now part of the conversation and using their voices and kind of growing into themselves. And so building confidence in the online space has almost become more possible than it is in a brick and mortar or in a physical space.
That sounds like you need a different kind of teacher to the one that many of us a little older went through. Well, first of all, you're not allowed to get a hiding anymore, which is, I suppose, wouldn't happen online. But secondly, many teachers don't like debate and discussion, and certainly not from those kids. So how do you select your teachers? Is it a different process? It doesn't sound to me like this kind of role that you're talking about, Sarah, would suit everyone who calls them a teacher today.
It definitely doesn't. This is not the typical teacher mold. We're looking for very specific kinds of people. So when we're hiring teachers, you could have 25 years of experience, but do you have the right attitude? Do you have the right mindset? Do you see that there's space to learn and grow? One of the biggest problems with education is that you have teachers who are so set in their ways, and sort of this response of, we've always done it this way and it works, so I'm going to keep doing it that way. And we really have to move away from that. There are so many opportunities, and the world is so different. I mean, take it 25 years ago. The world is completely different now. So yes, you could have all the experience in the world, but we're hiring people for the culture they bring, the attitude they bring, the belief in students, the way they speak about students. That's really important to us.
Liebe asks, how do you accommodate different learning styles and students who need different levels of facilitation? I guess the bright ones and the other ones who might be struggling with a particular subject.
So we do, our teachers are incredibly qualified. And again, as I said, the attitudes that our teachers have towards learners is not, oh, well, if you didn't get it the first time, that's on you. So the attitude that our teachers have is to go to the ends of the earth for our students. We have one teacher, our science teacher, who has openly said he would take a bullet for his students. So that's a good starting point. And hopefully he never actually has to take a bullet for anyone. But that, so it starts there. But then we also, because of the data that we're able to collect and because of the engagement that we have with students, we can actually ascertain who needs more support where. So we also have a rigorous intervention process where we are able to work with individual students where they set personal goals. So I'm really struggling in maths and I want to go up 5%. And then the teacher will guide them through that. What can you do to change your behaviors or your attitude so that you are able to achieve this goal? And then weekly, the teachers will check in with their students to see, are you doing the things you thought you needed to do to achieve this goal? How's it looking? Where have there been stumbling blocks? Where have there been any wins? And that way you have this very individualized experience where the needs of learners are being met and no one falls through the cracks.
Gerard asks, how does the medium work with kids with attentional difficulties?
This is another thing that's really interesting about the online space, is that when you are teaching a group of learners who are all sharing a space, and you have some learners who struggle to concentrate, and so they have, as an example, ADHD, and so they can't sit still, then it kind of ripples throughout the classroom. And so having a learner in their space means that they are able to kind of create mechanisms that doesn't disrupt the other learners. So, I mean, there's so many strategies that you could use. For example, if you're someone who needs to keep bouncing your foot, you could literally just take an elastic band and tie it from one leg of your table to the other so that it's across. You just bounce your foot on it. And that's been proven to make incredible differences for learners who are having to sit in a space, but they need a little bit of movement. The other thing is that you don't have to sit in one spot when you're learning. We have some learners who they carry their laptops around, they're listening and they're engaging, but they're walking around and they're outside, or wherever they need to be, they get to choose the space that they're actually physically in, even though they are mentally engaged with what we're doing online.
Graham's question says, how do students learn to work in teams?
So in our design of our courses, we have breakout sessions. So anyone who's used Zoom would be familiar with that mechanism where you can literally send people into breakout groups. So there are a number of ways that we do that. The one that we have found to be most effective is actually defining roles. So when a learner or a bunch of learners go into a group to work together, there is a facilitator, there is a note taker, you're going to research this part of the question, you're going to research that. So in terms of, young people need that modeling. They need to know what it is that they have to do when they go into the group. And as they get older and they get used to that, they start understanding, okay, if we're going to have effective group work, then we need to assign roles. So ultimately, you don't need to tell them who needs to do what. They know this is how we need to work in a group, and they're able to do that themselves and make those decisions.
Rob, maybe for you, Belinda asks, how many students are online at any one time?
So we've got a range of different synchronous activity types. Some of the classroom settings are range from 25 to 35 students, but then we have the small intimate breakout sessions, which, like Sarah was mentioning, are 4 students at a time with their teacher. We've got different contexts where the mentor will be working one-on-one with students or in small groups of 3 or 4. And then finally, we have extensive, every single day we have office hours where students can book time. It's either optional or mandatory. Optional if a student wants to book one-on-one time with their teachers, or mandatory if a teacher, like Sarah has mentioned, is noticing that a student is struggling and needs some additional support, can require them to come to office hours, which effectively is extra tutoring. So there's a range of different activity types that have different group sizes for them.
Gavin asks a question that I think is going to resonate with many. He says, in the 1980s, we saw the rise of latchkey kids, children coming home to an empty house to do homework. Are we now going to see children at home alone all day?
I think that there's a few answers to this question. The first answer is that there are a range of different schools which are increasingly individually better suited to a range of different personality types. I'm certainly not saying that for every single student that online is the appropriate medium. I think the traditional brick and mortar system works very well for certain student types. That said, what we're seeing, and certainly the interest in our school is one testament to this, is that there are increasingly a number of students for whom the traditional modality is not the right solution, that they actually want more flexibility, more individuality in their schooling experience. They want to be able to pace their schooling differently. They want the ability to work from multiple locations around the country, or indeed around the world. And so we're seeing that there's this rise of students for whom this is a really suitable modality. Does that mean that there are certain students who are actually working from home and studying from home all day? Yeah, it does. It does. And for many students that actually works exceptionally well. That said, we're seeing, and we're actually running a number of different models of our online education program. So for example, we have a model where we have launched a series of boutique campuses, where the fundamental premise here is that students are still completing all of their learning online, but they're coming into a physical space every day. So we've got a campus in Dunkeld and one in Newlands in Cape Town. And those spaces look very much like co-working spaces where learners are coming into the space, they're setting up their laptop computers. Again, all of their teaching and learning is taking place online, but critically the role of a mentor, which is typically virtual for our online-only students, is actually physically present on the ground, providing that pastoral care, that socio-emotional and psychosocial support to these learners, and then introducing a range of extracurricular and social enrichment activities on the ground. Then separately, we have a new school that we've just launched with St. Stithians College. It's in fact their 8th school, which is the St. Stithians online school. And in this model, all of the academics are taking place online, but students can still come to the campus in order to compete in sports with clubs like Crusaders and so on. And so I think that what we're going to start seeing, Alec, is a much broader range of schooling types and combinations to better suit the individual needs of learners, as opposed to there's one school model, and if you don't fit into that school model, well, then you're just a bit of an outcast. I think what I'm really excited about is increasing there's a range of additional opportunities for those learners to find home.
Sarah, Graham's follow-up question earlier when he asked you about how do they learn to work in teams is, what about social awareness?
So this is something that we haven't actually touched on, which is something else that Valenture is doing, which is just so great. And it actually comes down to the structure of how we deliver education. So traditionally in a school, you have the teacher who is everything. You are the counselor, the psychologist, the social worker, the teacher, the project manager, the curriculum specialist, the content developer, the sports coach. You're everything, and it's exhausting. And so what we have done is we've actually divided that role so that you have the teacher who is an expert in teaching and being that person who is able to engage the learners with the content in the learning space. Then what we also have, which connects to this question, is mentors, which Rob has mentioned. So our mentors are trained psychologists or counselors who have experience in that area and are therefore far more qualified to deal with those kinds of needs that the learners face. And so each learner has a mentor. So the ratio is about 30 students to one mentor. And the mentor is there to really hold the students and help them with all their emotional needs, whatever that might be. And that means that they are able to support learners in that socio-emotional development when we can't, if there's a barrier to that in the classroom, for argument's sake, a mentor would be able to carry on with that and help. We also have a learning compass program so that the students are meeting every week with their mentor in a group where they can talk through things like study techniques, social engagement, stress management, responsibility when it comes to, or time management in terms of workload. So you constantly have someone who is catering to those socio-emotional needs outside of the classroom, meaning that when the students do come to the classroom, they've had regular conversations about these kinds of things, and they know where the boundaries are and they know what's expected of them.
Robert, we've got a lot of questions, but I've got one burning in my head here. Are you finding from the Get Smarter experience, and I know Valenture's very young and you wouldn't have that many graduates yet, that the graduates who are coming out of your online environment think differently about the world of work, i.e. maybe they are more entrepreneurial, maybe they want to be more of a professional than sometimes there's this idea that you finish work and you either go and work for government or a big company, and that's where the life will take you. Just as a thought, is there any relationship there?
Absolutely. I mean, one of our founding motto is think outside the classroom. And really what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect learners from, I guess the traditional model is if I were to offer a rather simplistic view of it, it's prepare students to write examinations, make sure that they can hold enough knowledge in their heads in order to write a high stakes examination. They can regurgitate the information, immediately forget about it and move on to the next one, follow the same process, move on to the next one, follow the same process. And again, I'm oversimplifying for dramatic effect there. That said, though, there's a lot of truth in that statement. And I think for me, one of the factors that's always seemed rather bizarre about education is that we're actually learning. Sarah mentioned this, it's innate, but it's innate when we care about a cause, when there's something that we personally have some sort of intrinsic drive in order to solve, in order to encounter, and so on, and we don't necessarily have the prerequisite skills. So we go through the rather challenging process of learning those skills in order to encounter that challenge, in order to achieve the objective that we innately care about. And so a lot of that's driven by passion. A lot of that is driven by purpose and a sense of care and curiosity in the subject matter that's being learned. And so one of the things that we found is that we need to contextualize our students' learning around causes that they care about. We can't just ask them to learn science for the purposes of writing the exam, but what about learning principles of science so that we can help solve real challenges as it relates to things like climate change right now. So before we started Valenture Institute, we actually went through an extensive market research process with over 4,000 teenagers from multiple countries around the world in order to find the common causes and challenges that this generation really cares about. And what came back, Alec, was just absolutely staggering. We found that beyond lip service and virtue signaling and so on, this generation really cares about making the world a better place. They care about matters that relate to social justice, inequality, climate change, and so much more. And as we started getting the more granular details as to the causes that they cared about, we saw that they mapped really well onto the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so part of what we've done at the Valenture Institute is that we've curated the curriculum and we've contextualized it around solving the world's biggest problems as defined by the SDGs. So whilst you might be learning science, you're learning about the principles of science so that they can be applied to case-based or problem-based learning opportunities as defined by the SDGs. So I think the opportunity here, and that what we're seeing already, is that we've got students who are actually developing the skills that you need to go out and affect real change in the world. That you've got students who are confident enough in themselves to self-organize around these groups that Sarah mentioned, to drive these projects, to have undefined learning outcomes and endpoints, and manage the process of solving real problems. And that for us is incredibly exciting. I think the other thing that I would say is that the world of work is increasingly global, and if we think that it's enough just to learn from the people immediately around us and learn with the students immediately around us, I think we're missing a very, very big opportunity for the future. And that is that these individuals are going to be entering a global workforce where a lot of the collaboration, a lot of the engagement is going to be digital. And so understanding how to work digitally in a remote context with learners in this context, but colleagues in the future from different cultures and different parts of the world, is actually going to be a key advantage for working professionals into the future. And we're thrilled to give our students that opportunity to learn those skills right now.
Wow. Jolie asks, do you have anything specific regarding access to devices and internet? Is this required for online teaching and learning, or is it the responsibility of the parents and learners?
So we do have quite specific requirements. One thing that I would say is that in the world of online education, there's been a lot of, shall we call it, fanfare around the idea that, oh, we can just give kind of, as long as everyone has a mobile device and they've got access to the internet, learning will magically happen. I would say that is completely not the case. We actually require students to have laptop computers, ideally with a second screen, high-speed internet connection, ideally UPS backup devices, so that there can be continuity regardless of power cuts and so on. But we actually give students a very specific list of requirements before they join us. And again, coming back to this idea of the mobile phone, a lot of the sorts of learning that we're asking students to engage in is not just kind of like, let me read through information. It's we need to do a comparative analysis from what this one perspective says and what that perspective says, and simultaneously I'm on a Zoom call with the rest of my peers trying to make sense of this in order to prepare a presentation to provide back to the rest of the group. And honestly, there's a very practical point there, which is just the sheer real estate that is required in terms of your screen space is actually a really important consideration. And again, this is the sort of thing where mobile can be used in bits and pieces, but it's simply not enough if you want to engage learners in higher order cognitive engagement.
Here's a lovely comment from Cassandra. She says, I just wish that this was available when I was in school. I'm quite regular at Get Smarter from about 2015. Have done about 10 courses so far. I think it's a great way of learning for me personally, as I'm ADHD and dyslexic.
Oh, no, thank you, Cassandra. And I think this is one of the things we're finding for learners across the board. Neurologically diverse students with special needs, we can't cater for all of those special needs, but we find that the online modality is fundamentally enabling for learners, again, who don't necessarily fit into the conventional kind of traditional school model, but like this, and these are all alternatives to the idea that there are a range of different learners with different requirements, and we need to set up a school system that is sufficiently flexible to accommodate those.
Leanne's question is, are Valentures teachers equipped to deal with and nurture children who battle with social anxiety?
And this I would bring us back to the point that Sarah made earlier, which is that we actually need to think differently in the future about, and sorry, let me actually start here. I go on this rant every now and then. I believe that the role of teachers is way too burdensome. I mean, have to be a subject matter expert, a curriculum designer, a lesson facilitator, a administrator, a sports coach, a confidant, a social worker, a counselor. I mean, it's simply too much to expect from one individual. And in my view, one of the greatest opportunities that all education institutions have is to effectively disaggregate that role into its component parts, put experts in every single one of those fields, and then attach clear, measurable objectives to each one of those functions. And I think that accountability is a piece that I won't go on a rant about, but that I feel very strongly about. As it relates to supporting learners, I believe that individuals who come from a counseling or psychology background are far better suited to provide for those needs necessarily than someone with a postgraduate certificate in education, as an example. So we've effectively introduced that disaggregation of the role. Sarah mentioned that there are dedicated mentors who are allocated to students from their first day with Valenture for the full duration of their studies with us. So you don't kind of mix and match year after year. You have one mentor who you build depth of relationship, depth of context with over 5+ years. And the ability for us to effectively support students in terms of those kind of socio-emotional and psychosocial needs is so much more augmented because of this disaggregation and the specialization that's provided.
David Melville, an old pal, says, hi, Alec. I think this is a wonderful this is wonderful for a family that may be living far away in the sticks, far from good schools, and then able to join in and enjoy a good education. That was just a comment. And then a follow-up from Cassandra, who's your Get Smarter star pupil, says, are there any plans for taking this format to university level? I've not yet found an online institution that offers NQF or unit standard aligned qualifications.
So the short answer is yes, but not necessarily to the full tertiary degree. I think that there's this really interesting space, and this is at the appropriate NQF levels, between schooling and tertiary. I think that as a country, we need to be thinking very differently about preparing people for the world of work. I don't know that everyone, in fact, not that I don't know, I'm certain that we don't yet still have the luxury of thinking that we can just get all students through to the National Senior Certificate, and then many of them will make their way to technical and vocational colleges, and other will make their way to tertiary, and then everyone will eventually get into work. I just don't think that we have that luxury anymore. I think we need to be thinking very differently, and there's a wonderful example of this in a school in Bonnievale, where the school is actually integrated directly with the needs of local employers and is producing graduates at a matric level who actually have the skills that are required by local industry. And I believe there is a huge opportunity, and it's something that we're working very hard on right now in order to enable students to come out with let's call it augmented matriculation that ideally is university certified, but can actually enable them to gain access to entry-level jobs, particularly in terms of digital economy skills. It would be premature of me to say much more about that than this, but please do watch the space.
A very quick answer, I think, from Helene's question. From what age or grade is this applicable?
Students can join us from grade 8. And so we are currently offering in the British curriculum the opportunity for students in grades 8, 9, 10, and 11. From September this year, we will also be accepting students at grade 12, and they will have the opportunity to articulate to what's called A levels in the British system, which is the equivalent of year 13, so 1 year post-matric.
September next year.
September 2021, yeah.
21, okay. Graham says this method of teaching seems to suit introverts better than extroverts. True or false, Sarah?
False. I mean, I'm an incredibly extroverted person, so I think, and that was my fear, is coming to a space where you could be isolated, it's just you and your laptop. And it is such a socially rich environment that at the end of the day, as an extrovert, I'm tired, I've spoken to enough people through the day that I can rest. And so I would say that what's really unique about what we're doing is that, in traditional spaces, it's the extroverts that always have the mic and the space to sort of be heard, and it's all about them. And now what we have is, the power of those people who are generally quiet get to come into the space. So it's actually a space that is absolutely in equal parts. You can be introverted or extrovert or a little bit of both, and you really can flourish in this space.
Nitish asks a question I'm sure others are thinking about as well. How does sport get considered when compared to the traditional model?
It's a great question, and something that at least up until recently we haven't had a very good solution for, at least in terms of the school offering the sport. So I mean, we've got examples of students who are actually high performing sports people, who are on South African national teams and so on, who this online modality provides just a level of flexibility, which means that they can compete at a very high level, participate in tournaments overseas and so on, and still continue with their studies. So for that's really exciting. But up until recently, we as a provider of education actually haven't been able to offer sport as well, until our partnership with Sinstithians, which again, the Sinstithians online school, we're incredibly excited to have launched just under 2 weeks ago, and we'll be accepting our first cohort in January of 2021. That model includes all academics taking place entirely online in this dynamic, socially rich online learning environment. But then students have access to Sinstithians to compete in sports with clubs like Crusaders on campus. And that for us is starting to really bring the best of what physical and brick and mortar education and offerings can provide with the best of online.
David asks, what matric are students being prepared for? And he says IEB. I think you've answered that in the British curriculum, is that right?
Indeed. So we're offering an international version of the British curriculum, and students have the opportunity to articulate all the way to A levels. They can exit at what's called AS levels, which in terms of alignment is the equivalent of a matric. We are strongly encouraging learners to complete right through to A levels, particularly considering the kind of very, very competitive environment and the opportunity to access high brand value universities.
Beth wants to know about costs.
So we have a range of costs depending on the number of subjects that you're taking, extracurriculars and so on, starting off at about $6,500.
Okay, in rands, what is that?
So it's typically from about 80,000 rand.
And how does that compare with private schools at the moment?
So I mean, private schooling ranges anywhere from kind of 60s to 70,000 to, I mean, if you're in boarding and so on, to anywhere to 250,000. Typically for schools offering an international curriculum, that you'll typically be looking at schools at about 120, 130,000 rand per annum. So we're coming in at an incredibly competitive price point there. As an example, for the Sinstithians online school, we are offering we're offering it at 85,000 rand per annum per student.
So how do you do it at so much lower, at a price that is below the traditional level?
I think there's a huge amount of inefficiencies in the traditional education system. So that's on the one side, I mean, What you won't see in traditional school systems are things like operations managers, business systems analysts, and so on, which is very integrated into our offering. So there's a strong focus on efficiency, on effectiveness, strong project management focus, and so on. So I think there's a fundamental dynamic there, which is just that there is that there's a lot more efficiencies that can be found if one really applies their mind. But secondly, there's a lot of the infrastructure costs and overhead that comes from CapEx, and those sort of requirements that are necessary for a brick and mortar school. And it's a huge overhead to be maintaining facilities, to be repaying mortgage loans, and so on. And those are the sorts of factors that we gratefully don't have.
Anya says, sorry I came in late, but is this only for kids in South Africa or also for kids abroad, i.e. fully online international or partnered with SA brick and mortar schools?
Indeed. So we've got students from South Africa, Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malta, Belgium, UK, US. We have a truly international contingent of learners. And I think this is one of the beautiful things about this modality is suddenly the fact that you're sitting in rural Mpumalanga doesn't mean that you can't be forging friendships with someone in Singapore and having the opportunity to work collaboratively in small project groups with students from around the world. And again, I think this is going to be a critical skill for the future, to be able to effectively understand people from different cultures, work with them in a remote and virtual environment. Very, very exciting to get these skills baked in at an early age.
It shows my age, because when I was growing up, we used to have pen pals that you would write to.
Yeah.
One I recall was in Seychelles, a place called Mahe, I think, somewhere there. Anyway, how
Brilliant.
interesting. And today you can actually see and engage directly. Belinda's question, she says, what is the duration of the high school program and what education level does it equate to when students graduate, i.e. A levels? I think you have answered that, but do you want to elaborate a little?
Yeah, sure. So we allow students to articulate all the way through to A levels, which is the equivalent of 1 year Postmetric, i.e. year 13. Students can, if they wish to, exit at AS levels, which is the equivalent of a South African matric. The total duration of studies, actually, interestingly, is if you want to go from grade 8 to AS levels, is actually 4.5 years. So we've actually found a level of efficiency that means that students can complete their studies slightly earlier. But again, if students want to complete all the way through to A levels, then that's an additional year on top of that.
We're coming to the end of our hour, but and a few questions still that I'd like to squeeze in. Helene says, congratulations, this is the future. Just think if all learners can have this standard of teaching and the schools can provide the sports, etc. Hopefully it will eventually happen and the governments will get involved. It would also decrease costs. And Humphrey says, can you convert from IEB and then complete A levels?
So you can. We would suggest that learners, if they're transitioning from the IEB curriculum into the British curriculum, that they rather come across at what's called IGCSE level, which would be the equivalent of about grade 10. It's the British curriculum, amongst other things, really drives students towards higher order cognitive abilities. And we do find that the later they join our system, the harder it is, the bigger the leap that they need to make. So we do have specific support structures and additional lessons and so on that we provide for learners in making that transition. It would take a particularly gifted student, particularly at matric level, to make the transition into British curriculum. But our really efficient and friendly admissions team can help you as you consider these sorts of factors. The students are required to write an admissions test where we take their results, we understand what would need to be provided in order to set them up for success, and we have a really strong engagement with our prospective students on that basis.
Rob, what about a post-matric, i.e. you finish your matric at a Newcastle High, and then you really keen to get into Oxford, maybe. Can you do A levels then with Valenture thereafter?
You
would
can,
that be
Alec,
practical though?
So you can, again, one of the things that it would be a big leap from what students are used to, particularly I mean, the phrase that's often used by students who have transitioned into the British curriculum is, "Jeepers, like I'm so used to having to remember facts. Now I'm constantly being asked to think for myself and to apply my learnings and so on." And that is just a process that does take some time. And again, in terms of our diagnostic assessments that we complete with students, we're able to give them a very realistic sense. As an example, if they were considering a Postmetric, we're able to give them a very realistic sense of, well, you're currently here, and if we're able to achieve it and succeed in A levels, this is the sort of workload that one can expect. Here's the sorts of additional office hours that we're going to ask you to partake in, and so on and so on. So it is possible, but again, I would say that the later you leave it, the harder the leap. I guess another thing that I would say is that for a lot of students who finish on the IEB curriculum, the leap into university studies, where it is a lot more autonomous, where there's a lot more self-management and so on, is often a very, very challenging transition. I think that this one of the great benefits of this modality is that it far better sets you up for the realities of tertiary studies, if that's where you're headed.
Marion asks, where is the school based? Cape Town or Johannesburg? Easy answer.
We're actually all over, so our team is entirely remote, and I think this is one of the great benefits. We've got teachers in England, in South Africa. We've got, and again, I've mentioned that we've got students from all over the world. I think that one of the great things about that is that we can access a global talent pool. So you're no longer limited in terms of your kids' exposure to the teachers who happen to live and work in the immediate proximity around that school. And so that for me is a really exciting prospect. That said, in terms of our boutique campus model, we do have physical presence, and currently we have boutique campuses in Johannesburg as well as in Cape Town, and we are planning expansion into London and Boston in the coming years.
And of course, you've got St. Stithians as well as a extracurricular in the last 2 weeks. Two more questions. I know we've gone over our time, but I'm sure that Sharon would like to hear the answer to this one. Is this approach feasible for younger learners, Sarah? And maybe I'll just add a little. What if you've got a really bright youngster who's sailed through school, maybe skipped a grade or a year or two, and is now 12, 11, and ready to come into grade 8? Is it feasible?
Absolutely. We actually have one of my students. She's incredible. I think she's just turned 12, and she joined us late, so she missed the first 6 months, and she is coming top in the class. So, wow. I mean, yeah, she's
hire her, Robert, sign her up now.
Exactly.
So, I mean, yeah, absolutely. If you're able to, keep up with the academic rigor, the rigor of the program, then absolutely. And again, for me as a teacher, I worry less about would they keep up academically, because that is one thing, but emotionally, would they be able to keep up with this older age group? So that's really where we have to actually focus our attention more than anything else. And again, that's where the mentors come in, because they're able to really determine, yes, this kid is bright, and emotionally they're going to be able to adjust to fit in well in an older group.
Jonathan asks, how is the social emotional learning aspect monitored and supported?
So I mean, happy to come in on that one. This again is where the magic of the mentors comes in. These individuals come from a psychology and counseling background. They have a very, very rich set of interactions with our learners. So as I mentioned, they've got things like daily stand-ups. Sarah mentioned the weekly learning compass calls. There are regular three-way conversations between mentors and the parents. So we're able to stay very close to the ground in terms of those socio-emotional opportunities or challenges. One of the other things that we do is that we have these cross-functional team meetings every single week, where all of the teachers, as well as the mentor who are allocated to a particular student, actually meet and discuss the progress of every learner. So we're inputting the feedback from our learning analytics, we're inputting the feedback from the teachers, as well as the feedback from the mentors, to get this very rich and holistic view of the learners, so that no matter what aspect you're coming in terms of your support, you're able to appropriately, you're able to understand the full context of these learners and adjust your support approach accordingly.
And the second last question, how are exams written or facilitated? This is from Carrie.
So exams currently are still physical exams, and so we have a number of examination centres both in South Africa and abroad, and students are actually required to come into a physical space to write the exams and so on. We are part of a pilot project with our accreditation partner Pearson EdXL to actually start doing remote proctored exams, and there's a whole world of technology now that actually monitors eye movements as students are completing their assignments to see whether they are referencing other documents, whether someone's talking in their ear. It's some very interesting advancements that are taking place there to get to the point where we can have absolute certainty around academic integrity, and that I'm really excited for. And again, this is a work in progress, but when we can have remote proctored exams as well as a fully online learning experience, I think things get really interesting in terms of flexibility.
Last comment from Anya. She says, okay, we're in Lisbon. My daughter's in grade 3. When will you get here?
So in the not too distant future, I have a personal view that the introduction of technology is most suitable from about grade 5 level. I am somewhat cautious about introducing too much technology much earlier than that, just considering the very tactile developmental process that's going on for learners. So we are in the process of planning our roadmap to building out additional grade levels at a younger level. But the fact that they're in Lisbon, they can it's still completely possible for them to study with us in this wonderful online modality.
Well, thanks for pushing the envelope a little, and we've gone a little over time, but not too badly. Sarah, Rob, it's been good talking with you. I'm certainly far better informed now, and we're delighted that we are partners with you and being able to expose your amazing innovative model to the BizNews community, and look forward to the next time. Until then, I'm Alec Hogg. Cheerio. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, which is compiled and produced by the team at biznews.com. A recording of this webinar will be available later today on the biznews.com channel on YouTube. From our team, until the next time, cheerio.